Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, reviving a knife from the heyday of American manufacturing. Today, I'm going to take a, well, not especially interesting or good kitchen knife, probably about 50 years old, and see if we can't squeeze another 50 years out of it. Super simple build, great for a beginner. We'll basically do it all by hand without using any fancy knife making tools. Here's the knife. My parents either bought it or had it given to them by my grandparents when I was a kid. This right here is where it got left on a burner a decade or two ago. The wood's splitting, the knife's dull, and a little discolored. It's an Echo product made in the US of A, which probably dates it right there. Echo was founded in the 1800s in Chicago, I believe, and was at one time probably the leading supplier of kitchenware in the country. Now, Echo still exists as a brand, though it hadn't been an independent company since the 1960s. The blade's not in bad shape, but the main job here is to replace the handle. So job one is to ditch the existing handle and start over. A couple of things to notice as we tear it apart. The handle is a single piece of wood. It's not glued. The blade simply inserts into a slot sawed into the wood. Then the blade is secured with peened brass rivets. So let's grab a chunk of wood. I had a student come in and use this nice piece of leopard wood a couple weeks ago. Recognize that one, Corey? Before we go any further though, I'll go ahead and spiff up the knife a little. The blade is stainless, but over 40 or 50 years' time, it's accumulated some dings and pitting. Fun fact, stainless ain't stainless. Even so-called stainless steels will pit eventually. Sometimes they may discolor a little. I'll begin in this case by taping some 600 grit wet or dry sandpaper to this machinist block. You could use a scrap piece of kitchen counter, metal, whatever. It just needs to be something that's really flat. Now I'll scrub around until I get things cleaned up a little. Look, I'm not going nuts here. Getting rid of every tiny little pit would thin this thing out until it was like paper. By the way, this is a serrated knife, and I want to mention something here because I get a lot of folks asking me how to sharpen serrations. Now, one way to do that is to get into all the little valleys and file them with diamond files and stuff, but that is not the best way. Virtually all serrations are made by cutting the serrations into one side of the knife. So the key to restoring them to factory sharpness is not to mess with that side, but to take material off the rear side of the knife. See here? Only the tiniest bit of stock removal is required to restore the original nice sharp points of the serrations. In this case, I'm doing that by tipping the knife just a hair to remove some extra steel along the edge. And that's all it'll take. Once I'm happy with the general surface finish, I'll move to a sanding block. Here I'm using a piece of old plastic cutting board. Something that has a little give is ideal for sanding blocks. Then I just go in with long, clean strokes from stem to stern, starting up on the tang where the handle will be and going all the way to the tip. This way the scratches run completely from one end to the other, which gives a nice clean appearance to the steel. When I flip the blade over, I protect the back edge with masking tape. Otherwise, grit will get under there and scratch things up, and then you'll have to mess with it again. I started with 600 grit, then moved to 1000 grit. Now, of course, if you were doing this with a really old knife, especially carbon steel with a lot of pitting and stuff, you'd probably start with a lower grit, but that's what worked here. Like I said earlier, I intentionally left a small amount of pitting, but on the whole, a much improved finish. On a stainless steel knife like this, the end result is not dramatically different. But for those of you who might want to take on a similar project with a carbon steel knife, the result will be dramatically different. Now we return to the wood. First, I'll saw out a rough blank from this larger piece, one that's just a little larger than the original handle. Time for some flattening and shaping. I'm using 80 grit sandpaper here, which goes extremely quickly. Not aiming for perfection yet, just close enough to shape for fit up. Time to saw the slot. The key here is to choose a saw with the right kerf. That's basically the distance from one side of the teeth to the other, which corresponds roughly to the size of the slot or gully that you eventually saw out of the wood. Sticking to the aim of doing this mostly by hand, I've got about a dozen hand saws of various sizes and shapes, so I choose one with a kerf similar to the thickness of the blade's tang. Boom, done. Nice tight fit. Next, I'll choose a material for the rivets. You could go with stainless steel, copper, whatever. Brass is the classic though, and for good reason. It works nicely and looks good. In this case, the holes are drilled for 1/8 inch diameter stock. I'll just saw off a couple of pieces, a hair longer than the thickness of the handle. Now I'll use the only power tool of this build, a drill press, to make the holes. The way I do it is to tape the blade on so it won't move, then drill through the first hole. Then insert a locator pin, sort of a belt and suspenders approach to make dead sure that the holes aren't out of alignment. Then drill hole number 2. After taping up the blade to keep from scratching it, I'll drive the pins through the handle. Then I'll file them until only about a 1/16 of an inch protrudes from each side. Now I'll peen them in. I could have used some epoxy here if I wanted, but peening works fine by itself. You can use a ball peen or a cross peen to mushroom the head of the pin and create a mechanical lock that will hold the whole thing together. I like cross peens because I think they spread the material more at the very top there and therefore create less chance of splitting the wood. Once they've spread a little, I'll flatten them. Easy does it. Especially with a thin piece of wood like this, it's pretty easy to do like Smart Guy did here and split them. Oh well, I'll fill that with a little wood filler off camera and then be more careful on the second rivet. Some filing to bring it to the final shape. more sanding. This time I'll move from 120 to 220, eventually going all the way up to 600. The focus here is grinding off the corners and getting the wood buttery smooth so the knife feels good in the hands. We're pretty much done. I'll add a little oil finish. This is a food safe walnut oil finish. And here's the final knife, rising from the dead after 50 years. So, fun little project. While this knife is a very ordinary piece of cutlery that could easily be replaced, it's nice to keep an example of a garden variety industrial product from the heyday of American manufacturing alive. The same process could be used to revive larger and more historically interesting blades, but for me, this sort of thing is just a fun excursion, bringing something out of the past and giving it a future. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrelsBlades.com.